is all right, child. You are safe here now.
The wind howled through the cracks of the Carter family's small wooden house, carrying the chill of another bitter winter night. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, barely giving enough warmth to keep the frost from creeping across the floorboards. Outside, the fields lay bare and lifeless, frozen earth beneath a sky heavy with gray clouds. Inside, Mary Carter sat near the dying fire, mending a torn shirt with hands red and raw from the cold. Her husband, Samuel, sat silently at the table, his broad shoulders slumped with exhaustion. A half-empty bowl of thin soup sat between them, their only meal that day. Their children, Eli, 10, and Clara, 7, lay huddled together beneath a single blanket, whispering softly to each other about warmer days that never seemed to come. The Carters were poor, poorer than most in their small village, but they had something many others had lost, a quiet, unshaken love for one another. It was the one thing that kept their hearts alive when their stomachs were empty. Suddenly, a faint sound broke through the whistle of the wind. It was soft at first, a cry, or maybe the mew of a stray animal. Samuel lifted his head. "Did you hear that?" he murmured. Mary paused her stitching, listening. There it was again, a weak, trembling cry, almost swallowed by the storm. She stood quickly, wrapping a worn shawl around her shoulders. "It's coming from the shed," she said, concern deepening in her eyes. Samuel frowned. "Probably just a fox. It's too cold for anyone to be out there tonight." But the sound came again, this time clearer. A child's cry. Mary didn't wait for another word. She lifted the latch and stepped out into the biting wind. Snow crunched beneath her feet as she hurried toward the shed. The lantern in her hand flickered wildly in the gusts. When she reached the door, she froze. There, curled up against the wooden wall, was a little girl. Her hair was tangled, her lips blue, her small body wrapped in rags. Mary gasped. "Oh, dear God." The girl didn't move. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her fingers clutched something against her chest. A tiny, silver locket. Without hesitation, Mary scooped her up. The child was light as air, her skin cold as ice. Samuel met her at the doorway, disbelief and fear in his eyes. "Mary, who is she?" "I don't know," Mary whispered, holding the child close. "But she's dying." For a moment, silence filled the room. Only the fire's faint crackle broke it. Samuel looked at his children, at the nearly empty pantry, at his wife's pleading eyes. They had nothing. Not enough food, not enough wood, not even enough hope. Yet as he looked at the fragile girl in Mary's arms, he felt something stir inside him. The same feeling he'd had when Eli was born, when Clara took her first steps. A spark of mercy, small but alive. He sighed heavily. "Bring her closer to the fire." Mary's face softened with relief. She wrapped the child in the blanket that once belonged to Clara and held her near the warmth. Slowly, color returned to the girl's cheeks. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, wide, frightened, and filled with confusion. "It's all right, sweetheart," Mary whispered, stroking her hair. "You're safe now." Samuel placed a hand on Mary's shoulder. "God must have sent her here," he said quietly. Maybe there's a reason." Outside, the wind still howled, but inside that little house, something changed. The air felt warmer, softer, as if the storm had paused for a moment to witness an act of mercy. The Carters didn't know who the little girl was, or what had brought her to their doorstep that night. But from that moment on, their lives would never be the same. Morning light crept through the cracks of the Carter family's cabin, faint and gray, carrying with it the chill of another winter day. The small house smelled of wood smoke and boiled oats. Mary moved quietly about the kitchen, her face tired but gentle. On the straw bed near the hearth, the little girl they had found the night before stirred beneath a patched quilt. It had been hours before the girl had fallen asleep. trembling and feverish, clutching that silver locket to her chest as though it were her only possession in the world. When she woke, her eyes darted around the small room, the flickering firelight, the wooden walls, the faces staring softly back at her. She looked frightened, like a wild bird unsure if it could trust the hand reaching out. Mary smiled and knelt beside her. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" The girl hesitated. Her lips trembled, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a whisper barely audible, she murmured, "Lena." Mary's eyes softened. "Lena," she repeated gently. "That's a lovely name." From the table, Eli frowned. He was only 10, but the lines on his small face spoke of worry and hunger. "Mama, we don't have enough for another mouth," he said quietly. "We barely got through last week." Samuel gave him a look, stern but tired. "Mind your manners, boy." Eli pressed his lips together and looked away. He didn't mean to sound cruel, but the truth weighed heavily on him. Every day was a battle against hunger. Every night his stomach twisted as he tried to sleep. Clara, younger and gentler, brought over a small bowl of porridge. "She can have mine," she said with a shy smile. "I'm not that hungry." Mary's heart ached with both pride and pain. She knew Clara was lying. The girl was always hungry, but she didn't correct her. Instead, she helped Lena sit up and spooned the warm porridge into her hands. Lena hesitated before tasting it, as if unsure she was allowed to. Then she began to eat, small, careful bites, tears glistening in her wide brown eyes. Over the next few days, the Carters learned little about where she'd come from. Lena rarely spoke. She jumped at loud noises and often woke crying in the night. Once, Mary found her sitting outside in the cold, staring at the horizon. "Do you remember your family, dear?" Mary asked gently. Lena shook her head, her fingers tightening around the locket. "They're gone," she whispered, and that was all she would say. Mary wrapped her in her arms and said no more. Eli watched all this in silence. He didn't hate Lena, not really, but he couldn't understand why his parents gave so much to her when they had so little. Whenever Mary spent time comforting Lena, Eli's stomach twisted with jealousy he couldn't name. The neighbors soon began to talk. "Did you hear about the Carters?" One woman whispered at the market. "Took in some stray orphan. Can't even feed themselves." Another scoffed. "Foolish, that's what it is. Kindness doesn't fill empty bellies." Samuel heard the whispers but ignored them. "Let them talk," he muttered to Mary. "We do what's right, not what's easy." Yet late at night, when he looked at their dwindling food stores and the bills that never stopped coming, he felt the weight of those words pressing on his chest. One evening, as Mary was tucking Lena into bed, the little girl looked up with wide, fearful eyes. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked in a trembling voice. People usually don't. Mary's heart broke at the question. She brushed Lena's tangled hair back and whispered, "Because everyone deserves to be loved, child. You're safe here." Something shifted in Lena then, a flicker of trust, fragile but real. That night, as Mary kissed her forehead, Lena whispered a word so quiet, Mary almost didn't hear it. "Mama." Mary froze. Her breath caught in her throat, tears filling her eyes. She pressed Lena's small hand in hers and whispered, "Rest now, sweetheart." Later that night, Samuel was fixing a broken chair near the hearth when he noticed something glinting under the light. It was the small silver locket that never left Lena's neck. Carefully, he picked it up, turning it over in his calloused hands. On the back, barely visible through the scratches, were 2 engraved letters. A.D., he frowned. "Strange," he murmured to himself. Mary looked up from her sewing. "What is it?" "Just the letters on her locket," Samuel said softly. Could mean anything, but as he handed it back, a chill passed through him. A feeling he couldn't explain. He didn't know it yet, but that tiny piece of silver carried a story, that would one day bind all their fates together. Years passed, and the little orphan girl became a young woman. The Carter's cabin, though still small and worn, was no longer filled with silence. Laughter, songs, and the sound of sewing needles clicking against fabric filled the air. Lena, now 13, had become the heart of the household. Gentle, hard-working, and wise beyond her years. But the world outside their home had grown harsher. The fields were dry, and the crops failed season after season. The village, once lively, had become weary with hunger and debt. Samuel rose before sunrise each morning to work odd jobs, his hands cracked and blackened from labor. Mary, though her body ached, mended clothes for neighbors to earn coins. Eli, now a tall teenager, worked beside his father in the fields. And Lena, though she was not born a Carter, carried herself as if she had always belonged. She tended the garden, helped Clara with her lessons, and stayed up late sewing under the flickering light of a candle that was often too short to last the night. Her soft humming often filled the dark hours, bringing comfort to the weary hearts around her. Despite the constant struggle, there was love, a quiet, stubborn love that refused to die, no matter how empty their plates became. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Mary leaned against the doorframe, watching Lena scrub the kitchen floor. The girl's hands were red and sore, yet her eyes were peaceful. "You work too hard, child," Mary said gently. Lena smiled faintly. "I want to help, Mama. You and Papa do so much already." Mary's throat tightened. The word Mama still touched her heart every time. "You've given us more than you know," she whispered. Outside, Samuel trudged home with Eli, both of them covered in dirt and sweat. "The foreman says there might be work at the mine," Samuel said grimly. "It's dangerous, but the pay's better than nothing." Eli frowned. "It's not right, Papa. They say men get trapped down there sometimes," Samuel sighed. "When you're a father's son, you'll learn that fear doesn't feed a family." That night, Mary waited until the children were asleep. She sat beside her husband by the fire, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't like the sound of that job," she said softly. "You've worked hard enough. Maybe there's another way." Samuel stared into the flames. "There's no other way, Mary. If I don't take it, we'll lose the roof over our heads." Tears filled her eyes. "We'll manage somehow. We always do." Samuel reached over and took her hand. "Maybe God sent us that girl for a reason," he said. "Every time I see her working, smiling, giving when she has nothing, it reminds me that maybe hope isn't gone yet." Mary squeezed his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Lena was our miracle." Weeks later, Samuel began work in the mine. The pay was steady but small, and danger was a constant shadow. Lena did her best to make the money stretch. She learned to patch shoes, make soap, and even bake bread from the little flour they could afford. Her kindness reached beyond the family, too. When old Mrs. Hayes from the next cottage fell ill, Lena brought her soup and washed her linens. "You're too good for this world," Mrs. Hayes told her once. Lena just smiled shyly and said, "Someone was kind to me once. I'm just passing it on." Still, hunger crept into their lives like a thief that never left. At times, supper was nothing more than a thin broth and a shared loaf of stale bread. Yet on Clara's 9th birthday, Lena refused to let sadness rule the day. She rose before dawn and made a small cake from scraps, a mixture of flour, honey, and love. The family gathered around their wooden table, holding hands as Samuel said, "Grace." "This may not be much," he said, smiling faintly. "But tonight, we eat like kings." They cut the small loaf into 5 pieces, sharing it equally. The taste was simple but beautiful, sweet with hope. As they laughed together, the flicker of candlelight danced across their faces, warming the room. For a brief moment, it felt like the world outside didn't exist. No debt, no hunger, no sorrow. Only family. But as the fire dimmed and the children drifted to sleep, Mary sat quietly by the window, her thoughts heavy. She looked out at the dark horizon, where the hills met the clouds, and felt an uneasy stillness settle in her heart. The air was too quiet. The wind, too, still. And though she didn't yet know why, she felt a shiver of fear run through her. It was the calm before the storm. The first cold wind of autumn carried bad news. It came early that year, sweeping through the valley like a whisper of warning. The trees were still half green when Samuel Carter came home from the mine with a limp and a pale face. Mary met him at the door, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Samuel, what happened?" He tried to wave her off, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a slip, that's all. I'll be fine." But he wasn't. The truth was written all over him, the dark bruises along his arms, the cough that tore through his chest, the way he winced with every step. By the time Mary got him to lie down, his skin was slick with sweat. Eli stood at the doorway, his face tight with worry. "Papa?" Samuel nodded weakly. "Don't you fret, son. It's nothing." But in the days that followed, it became clear that it was something. The mine had collapsed in one section. Several men were trapped, and though Samuel escaped, he'd been crushed by falling timber. He could barely move his left leg, and each cough brought up specks of blood. The small coins he'd earned from the mine stopped coming. Mary tried to stay strong, but the weight of survival grew heavier by the day. She sold what little they had, Samuel's spare boots, a broken chair, a few tools. Still, it wasn't enough to pay the doctor, and winter was coming fast. Lena, now 16, refused to let despair take them. She rose before dawn each morning and walked the 3 miles to the town market. There she washed dishes in the back of a tavern for a few coins, sometimes serving bread to men who mocked her for her ragged clothes and quiet voice. She ignored the cruel words. She had no time for pride. Not when her family was starving. At night, she returned home with tired feet and blistered hands. Mary would wait by the window, her heart aching as she watched the girl approach through the darkness. "You shouldn't be working yourself to death," she'd whisper. Lena would only smile. "It's all right, Mama. I'll manage." But even as she said it, she knew she was wearing thin. Some nights she didn't eat at all, so there'd be more for the others. Eli noticed. He watched her silently, his emotions twisting into something bitter and confusing. He was 17 now, tall and strong, but helpless in the face of his father's illness. Each time he saw Lena come home exhausted, handing her meager wages to Mary, guilt and jealousy battled inside him. "She acts like she's the only one who cares," he muttered one night to Clara. "She does care," Clara said softly. "Maybe that's the difference." Eli turned away, ashamed but angry. He didn't understand why he felt so small beside her. The girl who had come from nothing, yet gave everything. Weeks passed, and rumors spread through the village. "Poor Carter family," people whispered. "That orphan girl's still living with them. Brings bad luck, they say. Ever since she came, nothing's gone right." Eli overheard these whispers at the market one afternoon. They burrowed into his heart like thorns. That night, a storm rolled in, dark, wild, and full of fury. Rain beat against the windows as wind howled through the cracks. The Carters huddled inside, their single candle flickering in the gloom. Mary coughed weakly from her bed. Her illness had worsened, and her once bright eyes were dim. Samuel lay beside her, too weak to rise. Lena tended the fire, her face lit by the orange glow. Eli stood near the door, arms crossed. "Why do you keep pushing yourself?" he snapped suddenly, his voice rising over the storm. "You think you can fix everything?" "You can't, Lena!" "You're not even—" He stopped, but the words hung heavy in the air. Lena turned, her eyes wide with hurt. "Not even what?" Eli's jaw tightened. Not even one of us, he muttered, the words spilling out before he could stop them. The room fell silent except for the wind. Mary tried to speak, but a cough cut her off. Clara began to cry softly. Samuel closed his eyes, too weak to intervene. Lena's lips trembled. "I've given everything I can," she whispered. "I never wanted to take your place, Eli." He looked away, ashamed, but pride wouldn't let him apologize. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Inside, something broke that could not be seen. A few minutes later, Lena went to her small corner of the house and quietly packed a bundle of clothes. She slipped a piece of paper onto the table, the ink smudged by her tears. When morning came, the storm had passed. But so had Lena. Mary found the note by the cold ashes of the hearth. Her hands shook as she read the words aloud. "Mama, Papa, Eli, Clara, thank you for giving me a home when I had none. I'll come back one day, when I can repay all that you've done. Until then, please don't worry for me. I love you all." The room spun as Mary clutched the paper to her chest. Her sobs broke the silence, echoing through the small house. Outside, the sun rose weakly over the valley, its light touching the empty path that led away from home, the same path where, years ago, they had once found a half-frozen child in the snow. And now she was gone again. The road stretched long and lonely ahead of her. Lena walked until her feet bled, until the hills faded behind her, and the village became nothing but a memory carried on the wind. Her bundle was small, a change of clothes, a few crumbs of bread, and the silver locket she had kept since childhood. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. For 2 days she slept in the open fields, under skies heavy with cold mist. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. The world, so wide and indifferent, seemed to swallow her whole. But she didn't cry. Not this time. She had promised herself that she would not be a burden. Not to the Carters, not to anyone. She would find a way to stand on her own, even if it meant facing the world with nothing but her will. On the 3rd day, she stumbled into a small town by the river, a place of smoke and stone, where merchants shouted in the market, and the scent of baked bread mixed with the stench of the docks. The town was loud, alive, and full of faces that didn't look twice at a ragged girl passing by. Lena found work where she could, washing laundry by the river, sweeping floors in a tavern, sewing patches for travelers. The pay was meager, but it was enough to buy a loaf of bread and a small room in a crumbling attic. Each night, she sat by the window, watching the lights of the town flicker in the fog. She thought of Mary's gentle hands, Samuel's quiet strength, Clara's laughter, and Eli's restless eyes. The ache in her heart was constant, but it pushed her forward. She began to change. The timid girl who once hid behind others learned to speak with confidence. The one who had given everything away learned the value of saving, of planning, of building something for herself. She became skilled with a needle and thread, crafting small garments to sell at the market. One afternoon, as she set out her work, a woman stopped at her stall, elegant, stern, and finely dressed. Her name was Mrs. Whitmore, the wife of a merchant who owned a chain of tailor shops. She admired Lena's stitching, precise, delicate, full of care. "You have talent, girl," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Come work for me. You'll have a roof, food, and proper pay." Lena could hardly believe her luck. She accepted at once. From that day, her life took a turn. She moved into a small room behind the tailor's shop and began working long hours under Mrs. Whitmore's supervision. It was hard work, but honest, and Lena poured her heart into every stitch. Months passed. The seasons changed, and slowly her hands grew steadier, her back straighter, her eyes brighter with purpose. Mrs. Whitmore, though strict, came to trust her. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," she said one evening. "Poor, stubborn, and too kind for your own good," Lena smiled. "Kindness is the only thing I have left," she replied softly. Mrs. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. "Hold on to it," she said. "The world will try to take it from you." 2 years went by. Lena became known in the town as a talented young seamstress, humble, polite, and skilled. Her dresses were sought after by merchants' wives and their daughters. The small wages she earned grew into steady savings, but no matter how far she came, she never forgot where she began. Each month, she set aside a few coins in a small wooden box, her home fund, she called it. Someday, she told herself, she would return to the Carters. She would repay their kindness, mend what had been broken, and tell them that she never stopped loving them. Yet the world had its own plans. One gray morning, as she walked through the market, she overheard a conversation that stopped her heart. Two miners were talking near a fruit stall, their voices low but urgent. "Bad collapse down by the valley mines," one said. "Whole section caved in. A family nearby lost their home in the flood that followed. The Carters, I think their name was." The blood drained from Lena's face. The air around her seemed to freeze. Without a second thought, she dropped the basket in her hands and ran. Through the crowded streets, past startled faces, and out onto the dirt road that led toward her old village. It took her 2 days to reach it. When she arrived, the valley was almost unrecognizable. The once green fields were torn and muddy, the small cottages half buried in debris. The mine had flooded after heavy rain, sending waves of water and mud cascading down into the lower grounds, where the Carters' home once stood. Lena's breath came in gasps as she stumbled through the wreckage. "Mama? Papa? Clara!" she cried, her voice breaking. There was no answer, only silence and the faint sound of rushing water. Then, through the smoke and mud, she saw movement. A small figure crouched beside a broken fence. Clara. Lena ran to her and pulled her close, tears streaming down her face. "Clara! Oh, thank God!" Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. "Lena, is it really you?" "Yes, sweetheart." "I'm here," Clara sobbed into her arms. "Papa's hurt. Mama's sick. Eli went to find help, but he hasn't come back." Lena's heart pounded. She followed Clara to a makeshift shelter built from debris. Inside, Mary lay pale and trembling, a fever burning through her. Samuel sat beside her, his leg twisted unnaturally, his face lined with pain. "Lena," Mary whispered weakly when she saw her. "You came back." Lena knelt beside her and took her hand. "I'll never leave again." Tears blurred her vision, but she pushed them away. There was no time for grief, only action. She tore strips from her own dress to bandage Samuel's wounds. She used her savings to buy medicine and food from the nearest town. She found a doctor, begged him to come, and worked through the nights to keep them alive. Day by day, the Carters began to heal. When Eli finally returned, mud-stained and weary, he froze at the sight of her. "Lena," he whispered, guilt flooding his face. She turned to him, her eyes soft but steady. "I told you I'd come back." He fell to his knees, tears spilling freely. "I'm sorry," he choked. "For what I said. For everything." Lena reached out, lifting his chin gently. "There's nothing to forgive," she said. "Family is family, no matter what blood runs in our veins." Outside, the sky broke open with sunlight for the first time in weeks. It touched the valley with gold, glinting off the river where the ruins still stood. But in that small corner of the world, among broken wood and mud, something stronger than ruin had taken root again. Hope. The valley had grown quiet again. Months had passed since the flood and the collapse. The Carters' home, though battered, still stood. A crooked little house patched with boards and hope. Smoke once again rose from the chimney, and laughter sometimes echoed through the cracked walls. But the peace was fragile. Samuel's leg never healed fully. He walked with a limp and pain that deepened when the nights grew cold. Mary's health wavered. Some days she was strong enough to tend the fire. Others, she lay weak and pale in bed. Lena became the pillar that held them all together. She rose before dawn, worked through the day, and often didn't sleep until the last candle burned out. She cooked, cleaned, and mended. She took work in town again, sewing dresses for the merchant wives, carrying heavy baskets, anything that paid a few coins. She never complained. But the lines of exhaustion deepened under her eyes. Eli watched her quietly, guilt gnawing at him each day. He had gone looking for work, chasing pride, and returned only to find the sister he'd wronged saving what was left of their lives. He wanted to tell her how sorry he was, but the words never seemed enough. One evening, as the family gathered around the table, a rare moment of warmth filled the small home. Clara hummed softly, Mary smiled faintly, and Samuel told an old story from his mining days. For a fleeting hour, it felt as though the years of pain had faded. Then a strange glow flickered through the window, orange and trembling. Eli frowned. "Is that fire?" Lena rushed to the door. Her breath caught. Across the valley, flames leapt into the sky, devouring rooftops and barns. The wind howled through the fields, carrying embers toward them. "Dear God!" Mary gasped. "The village!" Panic spread quickly. The fire was moving fast, driven by dry wind and months without rain. Villagers ran through the streets shouting, trying to douse the flames with buckets of water that vanished into smoke. Within minutes, the fire reached the Carters' end of the valley. Sparks rained down on their roof. The wooden beams hissed. "Eli, help me with the water!" Samuel shouted, grabbing his crutch, but the flames were merciless. The roof caught. Smoke poured through the cracks. Mary coughed, clutching her chest. "We have to get out." Eli helped her to the door, but a falling beam blocked their way. Clara screamed. The heat was unbearable. A furnace of light and sound. "Through the back," Lena cried, dragging a blanket to cover them. She pushed them toward the rear exit, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. The air tasted of ash and fear. Outside, chaos reigned. Neighbors shouted, some trying to save their homes, others fleeing into the fields. But the Carters' house was already half engulfed. "Papa can't walk fast enough," Clara cried. Lena turned back to see Samuel stumbling, his injured leg giving way. Mary tried to hold him up but nearly collapsed. "Go!" Samuel wheezed. "Save the children." But Lena didn't move. She ran back inside. The house groaned around her as she pushed through the thick smoke. The world blurred, shapes of flame and shadow. She reached Samuel's side and hooked her arms beneath his. "Hold on," she gasped. He coughed, his voice rough. Don't you dare tell me to leave," she shouted, her voice raw with tears. "You saved me once. Let me save you now." The ceiling cracked above them. Flames licked down the walls. With every ounce of strength she had left, Lena pulled him toward the open door, stumbling through the fire. Eli appeared through the haze, grabbing Samuel's other arm. Together they dragged him out just as the roof collapsed behind them. But Lena didn't stop. She turned back. "Mary!" she screamed. Mary was still inside, lost in the thick smoke, trying to find Clara's small wooden doll, the one Samuel had carved years ago. Lena rushed in again, ignoring the pain of burning wood beneath her feet. "Mary!" a faint voice answered. "Here!" Lena followed the sound and found her, weak and coughing, clutching the doll to her chest. Without thinking, Lena wrapped her arms around her and shielded her from falling debris. The heat seared her arms, her dress catching fire at the edges. She bit down on a cry and kept moving, half carrying, half dragging Mary through the flames. The door burst open. Cold night air hit her face as she stumbled out, both of them collapsing onto the dirt. Eli rushed forward, throwing a blanket over them, beating out the flames. The house roared one last time and caved in, sending sparks high into the sky. Lena lay still, her breath shallow. Her hands were blistered, her hair singed, her dress torn. Yet in her eyes there was peace, the kind that comes after fear, when love has conquered pain. Eli knelt beside her, tears streaking his soot-covered face. "You saved us." "Again," he whispered. Lena tried to smile. "It's what family does," she murmured, her voice faint. The fire raged through the night, but by morning the village lay in ashes. Only charred beams and smoke remained where homes once stood. Yet among the ruin, people gathered, helping, comforting, rebuilding. Word spread quickly about the young woman who ran into the flames to save her family. Some called her foolish, others called her brave. But to the Carters, she was a miracle. Their miracle, returned from loss and suffering to show them what love truly meant. As dawn broke, the first light touched the valley. The smoke began to clear, and the sound of rebuilding filled the air. Eli stood by Lena's side as she rested under a makeshift shelter. Her burns were severe, her body weak, but she was alive. He took her hand, trembling. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said softly. "I don't deserve you." She opened her eyes, the faintest smile on her lips. "You're my brother," she whispered. "And family always forgives." Her words hung in the cool morning air like a prayer, fragile, beautiful, and everlasting. The world around them was broken, but within that ruin, something unshakable remained. Love, scarred, tested but undefeated. The sun rose over the valley, weak and pale, brushing the blackened remains of the village with gold. Smoke still curled from ruined roofs, and the air smelled of ash and wet wood. The Carters huddled together under a makeshift shelter, their clothes damp, their faces streaked with soot, but their hearts still beating. Lena lay on a blanket, her burns stinging, her hands blistered and red. Yet she smiled faintly as she saw her family alive. Mary leaning against her husband, Clara clutching Eli's hand, and Samuel nodding weakly in recognition. A nearby doctor had arrived just before dawn. He attended to the worst injuries first: Samuel's twisted leg, Mary's exhaustion and fever, and then Lena's own wounds. He shook his head at her. "You're lucky to be alive, young lady," he said. "Your burns could have been much worse." Lena forced a small smile. "I couldn't let them—" "Not after everything." Eli knelt beside her, tears glistening in his eyes. "I was a coward," he whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't believe in you. I doubted you." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't need to believe in me, Eli. Family is more than faith. It's love, and love forgives." Mary pressed her hand to Lena's face, her eyes misty. "You saved us twice," she whispered. "First, when you became part of our lives, and now you've saved our very lives." Samuel, still weak, nodded in agreement. "You've given us more than life itself. You've given us hope." For a long moment, they simply sat together, the first quiet minutes after the fire, each heartbeat a reminder of survival. Outside, the villagers began to sift through the ashes, salvaging what they could, helping one another rebuild. Stories of Lena's bravery traveled fast, and whispers of admiration reached the ears of all who had doubted the Carters' choice to take her in years ago. Later that day, Lena learned something that would change her life forever. A lawyer from the city arrived with a letter from Madame Delane, the elderly woman who had taken her in after she ran from the Carters years ago. Lena read the words aloud, her voice catching. "To my dearest Lena, you have shown kindness and courage beyond measure. I leave you my estate, the sewing business, my home, and all that I have, to continue the good you bring into the world. Let it be a foundation for hope, for love, and for the children who need a chance at life. tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. "Madame Delane, she believed in me all along," she whispered. Mary squeezed her shoulder. "And now we can have a new home, Lena," she said softly. "Somewhere safe, somewhere strong. You've earned it for all of us." Eli knelt again, holding Lena's hand in both of his. "I'm sorry for everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For my anger, my doubts, my jealousy. Can you forgive me?" Lena smiled, gentle and unwavering. "Family forgives," she said simply. "Always." For the first time in many years, the Carters felt whole. The fire had taken their home, but it could not take their bond, their love, or the courage that had carried them through. Lena's return had not only saved their lives, but had restored the very heart of their family. That evening, as the last embers of the village fire died, Lena sat by the river with Clara and Eli, watching the sun dip below the hills. "Do you think we'll ever rebuild?" Clara asked quietly. "We will," Lena said, her voice steady. "It will take time, but we have each other. And now we have hope too." Hope, she realized, was the most valuable thing in the world. Stronger than fire, deeper than loss, and brighter than any fortune. The Carters were battered, scarred, and forever changed. But they were together, alive, and bound by a love that no storm, no fire, and no hardship could ever break. And in that moment, Lena understood the full meaning of her journey, that even the smallest acts of kindness, given freely, could grow into miracles beyond imagination. Years passed, and the valley slowly healed. The Carters' new home stood firm on a small hill Lena had purchased with her savings from Madame Delane's estate. It was modest, but strong, a place of warmth, safety, and laughter. Lena rebuilt the sewing business into more than a trade. It became a community workshop where widows and orphans learned to sew, mend, and create. The rhythmic click of needles filled the air, mingling with the chatter of children learning to dream again. Mary and Samuel watched proudly as Lena guided the workers with patience and love. Clara, now a young woman, managed the day-to-day operations alongside her, while Eli taught local boys the skills of carpentry and farming, passing on the lessons he had learned the hard way. One quiet morning, Lena knelt at the cornerstone of the new workshop. She carefully placed the silver locket, the one she had carried from her childhood, the one that had bound her to the Carters, into the stone. She pressed her hand against it, feeling the weight of years, of love, and of unbroken hope. "This is where it begins again," she whispered, "where kindness grows, where love endures, where no one is ever truly lost." The sun rose behind her, spilling golden light across the valley. Children's laughter drifted on the breeze, mingling with the soft hum of sewing machines and the warmth of fires burning in every home. Mary stood beside her, clasping her hand. Samuel and the others joined, forming a circle. Together they looked out at the village, reborn, thriving, and alive. Lena smiled, tears shining in her eyes. What the world calls poor, love makes rich, and in the quiet strength of that moment, it was true.